Chapter 1. A day of much slaying. There was a day not long ago beneath a sky of greying, where men were called to battle. This day, so bold of heroics untold, was known as the much slaying. Unknown poet, 15th century, following the Battle of Towton. March 30th, 1461 A.D. The Towton battlefield, aftermath. The battle, more than most, had been brutal to a fault. Even though it was March, there had been a heavy snowfall most of the day, adding to the misery of a battle that had seen 70,000 participants fighting for the houses of Lancaster and York, in the culmination of battles upon battles, with seemingly no end. Yet this battle had an end. It was almost over, decisively over. The smell of victory was almost as heavy as the smell of death. The big knight ploughed his way through the slushy, bloody snow, mingled with mud that gave it a brick-red appearance. There were bodies everywhere of the dead and dying, and he found himself stumbling over men who were breathing their last and calling to gods or wives or mothers. Still, he ignored them, singularly focused at the moment. He had been summoned. A bone-weary foot soldier had called him to Northumberland's tent. His liege, the Earl of Northumberland, was part of the contingent of the defeated in a battle that had virtually wiped out the House of Lancaster. The Yorkists were now in control, and Edward IV had taken the throne from Henry. It was almost too surreal to believe in any case. But the big knight with the worn, dented armor and circled dark eyes that hadn't seen sleep in 2 days didn't care about any of that at the moment. If what the foot soldier had told him was true, he would soon be facing his own particular brand of grief. His charger had fallen in the first few hours of the battle, so he crossed the snowy, bloody field on foot. As he mounted a small rise and struggled not to slip in the bloody sludge, a wounded knight in heavy armor suddenly rose from the dead, emitting a strangled growl as he charged with his broadsword levelled. The big knight lifted his weapon, a massive blade forged in Rouen, with the de Wolfe family crest on the hilt, and engaged the wounded knight in a nasty sword fight that, when the blade was knocked from his weary and frozen hand, turned into a fist fight. It was a short and brutal fight, as the big knight threw several punches to the head of the wounded knight, driving the man to his knees, and finally back to the ground. Even then, the big knight didn't stop. He took the wounded knight's own weapon from him and shoved it through his neck. Grunting with effort, exhaustion, and perhaps despair, the big knight collected his fallen sword and continued across the frozen moor, slipping in the coagulated blood, heading for the collection of tents on the southwest side of the field where Northumberland's encampment was lodged. By the time he reached the tents, his breath was coming in big, great foggy puffs. Against the sunset and the snow, he looked like a primal beast making its way through the mists of time. It was a surreal and mystic vision. It was a sad and defeated encampment. Where there had been hope only yesterday, now there was the start of trappings of defeat. The snow had attached to the fabric of the tents, soaking them and causing them to sag, much like the sagging spirits of the men they sheltered. The big knight headed straight for the largest tent, half of it collapsed under the weight of the melting snow. The tent belonged to his liege, the Earl of Northumberland, who had been killed along with thousands of others that day. Now, Henry Percy's advisers were in charge because there was no one else. Northumberland still had over 1,000 men that were still mobile. That was only a guess, because the death rate was so high that no one could even guess how many men Northumberland had really lost that day. The big knight ignored the beaten, defeated soldiers standing around the entrance, men who looked at him with sorrow and perhaps some fear. Eyes watched the knight as he disappeared into the sagging tent. It was warm and stale inside, in spite of the condition of the tent, smelling of shite. A brazier was glowing, hot with burning dung and peat, offering a small measure of warmth against the freezing temperatures. But it was dark inside the tent, and all the big knight could see were silhouettes of men, phantoms in the darkness, and his eyes sought out those he recognized. As he struggled to adjust to the dim light, a man suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking his path.